Brian, jy het groot geword in 'n kleinhandelhuis. En jy het op die ouderdom van 14 het jy begin werk by die OK Bazaars. Daai waarde om so jonk alreeds betrokke te raak, wat het dit later tot jou sukses bygedra?
Het 'n groot invloed gehad. Michael en ek het albei begin toe ons net so groot was om op 'n kassier se stoel te sit en die til aan te kom, en daar begin ons. And from there we grew the business. You know, I don't know if it was the fact that we were good at it or that we loved it, which came first. I don't know if we were good at it because we loved it or because we loved it, that's why we were good at it.
In 1983 is jy 23 jaar oud. Jy en jou broer besluit julle gaan julle eie besigheid begin. Maar 2 jaar later vou hierdie besigheid. Die besigheid gaan bankrot. Vertel my van daai ervaring.
Het was moeilike jare hoor. Maar en dit is 'n bietjie lang storie. As jy my 'n bietjie tyd gee, sal ek jou storie vertel, maar in Engels. As dit.
Sekerlik.
Okay, dankie. My brother and I were managers at the OK Bazaars. I was 23. He was 25 years old. And he phones me from Hillbrow. And he says, Brian, it's time we stopped working so hard to make other people rich and perhaps started working for ourselves. Look, we certainly didn't realize that working hard was going to get a whole lot harder and that making other people rich was a lot better than making ourselves poor. And we had worked our whole teenage lives and our adolescent lives and our young adult lives in retail. So we thought we knew what we were going to do. I was 23 years at that stage. I owned a suitcase of clothes, and it took me about 3 minutes to agree. And we borrowed money from my sister, and he sold the house he had been building on weekends and holidays, and we bought our first store. And it was a little spa in Vanderbilt Park. It was actually only a glorified cafe. It was 200 square meters in size, and in the first month we doubled the turnover. Look, there wasn't a retailer around, whether it was Pick n Pay, Hypermarket, OK Bazaars, Hyperama, or Grand Bazaar Superstore in the area in those days that we didn't take on to try and beat. If they dropped the price of cigarettes, we dropped it further. If they held the price of bread, we held it longer. And turnover was flying. We had a retail ledger that the OK Bazaars had taught us, and the margin looked pretty good. And we never ever took stock because we thought stock take was something OK Bazaars did to punish their managers. And in about 6 or 9 months, we opened another store. Not down the road, but 100 kilometers away. And the turnover was growing. But what they didn't tell us was the creditors was also growing. And I guess the first thing we actually learned was that if you're going to wait for an auditor to give you a balance sheet and a note to say that your business is in trouble, that auditor was going to join the queue of creditors. Now, working from 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock every night, 18 hours a day for 7 days a week, wouldn't have been so bad if you didn't have to take every Sunday night, take the take-ins and put them into envelopes for the creditors who were going to be at your door the next morning. And there were never enough envelopes. And the creditors who never got their envelope had to actually end up standing behind the till and waiting for this. And a particular sad Saturday afternoon, I remember I took my newly engaged fiancée with me to see our largest creditor, who happened to be the fruit and veg supplier at the time. And we drove there in my little 1200 Nissan Bakkie, and I walked up to the office, and needless to say, he spent the next 20 minutes telling me in front of her how my checks keep bouncing, how I never pay when I'm supposed to pay, and I never pay what I'm supposed to pay. So we come back down, and we get into the little 1200 Bakkie, and with tears in her eyes, she says to me, Brian, take this engagement ring, which I'd bought her from my pension fund at the OK Bazaars in those days, and try and offset it off the debt. Look, I didn't have the heart to tell her that it was only a drop in the ocean. And that was the 2 years that we had spent running our own business. We closed the chapter of that book. We paid the suppliers everything we could pay. And we decided that we're going to move on.
Julle het toe besluit, julle gaan aan. En julle het besluit, julle gaan hierdie bil by die horings pak. Julle gaan weer julle eie besigheid begin. Die vertroue om te besluit, jy gaan weer jou eie besigheid begin. Vertel my daarvan.
Okay, by now, I'd married that lovely woman with the engagement ring, so I was married. Why she stayed with me for the last 30 years is a mystery to me. But I was married. My brother had his first child, and we could have gone back to the OK Bazaars. We were great operators, and they wanted us back. But we decided we had learned a lesson. We still were full of ambition, drive, and desire. And so we went back to that first supplier, the fruit and vegetable supplier, and we said to him, look, you've lost money with us once before. We have a new concept and a new idea, and we really think we've learned, and we'd like you to back us again. And to put a number on it, I think that his original debt was 80,000 Rand, is what we owed him. And 7 years later, by the time we had bought him out, he had made 20 million Rand in the 7 years. He's since retired and immigrated to Australia. And thank God we took that decision to start again.
Ek wil spring na Februarie 1993. Julle begin die eerste fruit and veg winkel. Hoekom het julle gedink dit gaan werk?
Clearly, we had been in retail now all our lives. We had been in wholesale business for the last 7 years in the fruit and vegetable industry. There was certainly a gap. The industry at that stage and the produce industry at that stage was dominated by the supermarkets. There were a couple of very good independent retailers, but we knew that if we brought the right product at the right price, there was a gap. At that stage, the supermarkets had grown their business so much in fresh produce that they knew continuity was becoming an issue with them. Cold store distribution was becoming an issue with them. Food security was becoming an issue. So they had invested in these expensive infrastructure models. They had to visit farmers and start planting programs. And they almost exited the municipal markets at the same time. And it left the gap for two young cowboys who thought they knew what they were doing, to walk onto the market, to pay cash, get the product to the store, faster, fresher, and at almost half the price. And that's really how we started.
Brian, toe julle aan die groei was, het jy 'n beginsel gehad wat jy sê, build first, tell later. Wat was daai beginsel?
Both my wife and my brother's wife, who's still involved in the business, were very conservative people, and they certainly were a little apprehensive about where we were going and at the speed at which we were growing. And to illustrate that point, we had got down to Johannesburg, in the Western Cape and in PE. We were a pretty household name, and our brand was well recognized, and we needed to go to Johannesburg and get the brand out there. And we bought a property right across the road from the Eastgate shopping centre, and we were going to build a shopping centre, and we were obviously going to be the anchor tenant. So I come home and I tell my wife that we bought this property and we're going to build this shopping centre, and she goes mad and she says, "Are you crazy? We're going to go bankrupt again." Needless to say, I sold that property I passed it on to a property developer. That property developer sold the same property which he had bought for 4.5 million Rand for 10 million Rand within 2 years, and we spent 20 million Rand paying rent on that property. So now we have a policy, first we build and then we tell.
Ek wil net kom by die eerste konsessiehouer met wie julle ooreenkoms gedoen het. Mens hoor baie keer van 'n transaksie is gedoen op die agterkant van 'n sigaretboks. In julle geval was dit werklik so. Vertel dit vir my.
So my ou vriend George Stratia was 'n Griek in die Oos-Kaap. Hy was 'n groot handelaar en hy het na my gekom en gesê, "Brian, ek like wat jy doen, kan ons asseblief iets doen in die Oos-Kaap?" En toe gaan ek daar en hy het 'n gym gekoop. 400 vierkante meter gym, en hy het gesê hy wil half 'n Fruit Veg City bou en half 'n gym sit. So I go down and I managed to convince him to close down the gym, to gut the whole building and to build a Fruit Veg City. And at the same time, in that afternoon, we sit in the pub with a cigarette box in the back of it, a Van Ryn's 30 cigarette box, and we discuss the supply agreement, we discuss the franchise fees, and we discuss how his area and how we're going to run this business. And he signs on the cigarette box, and I sign on the cigarette box, and 6 months later, he opens his first Fruit Veg City store. The strange part about the story is that no one's ever seen the cigarette box again because I actually lost it on the way back. And for 10 years, nobody ever asked it, and we ran on that handshake for 10 years. It was really only when we sold when the deal to Pick n Pay was being spoken about that we had to formalize that arrangement. But he's now a director on our board. He's my partner in a couple of property developments and he's a great guy.
2005 was 'n belangrike jaar. Op daai stadium het julle begin voel dat die res van die mark het opgevang met julle varsprodukte en julle het dit oorweeg om uit te brei na bakkerye, slagters en self die taboe van warm kos aan te vat. Daai besluit, vertel my daarvan.
Okay, remember the period we had been experiencing the biggest economic boom that the country and the world had ever seen. The rest of the retailers had realized that we were getting into their market share, so they were pricing more aggressively. And quite frankly, their produce departments were getting up to scratch and they were competing neck and neck with us. We had started dabbling in bakeries and butcheries, and we had milk on tap and juice on tap. But we knew that if we wanted to take this fresh destination shopping environment to the next level, we had to up our game. We had to become as good in meat and in bakery and in fish as we were in fresh produce. So I put a team together and we went around the world. We started in Germany, in Berlin, at a company called Cardiff, who were doing a great job of fresh. We went to London, we saw Harrods and Selfridges and Waitrose, and then we went over to the States and saw some wonderful concepts. We saw Stu Leonard's, Wegmans, and we went to Whole Foods. And while I'm overseas in the States, Michael's back in Johannesburg. We're taking the old Yilfox store in Roodepoort, and we're negotiating for new premises. And I keep phoning and saying, Michael, make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bigger. And eventually we come back and the project begins, and every week I have a meeting with the accountants and the project managers and the architects, and everybody's getting more and more nervous because without a doubt it was the biggest roll of the dice we had ever taken on. It was going to be a 3,600 square meter store selling 95% fresh. It would have 300 staff, and we had to bring what we saw in America here. And not a lot of people believed we could do that. We gave it a name called Food Lovers Market, and we opened it in December of that year. And it was a fantastic success. And in the first 3 months, we had as many competitors visiting us as customers. And that's become our premium brand now.
Waarom is dit so suksesvol, Food Lovers Market?
It's that whole theatre of food. It's really about saying that if you want to have a braai tonight, or if you want to entertain tonight, come to us and we'll give you this massive range of fresh, and we can give it to you. And what we didn't bring from America, from Whole Foods, of course in America Whole Foods is called the whole paycheck. We brought the same product, but we're a value-driven business, so we kept our prices pretty reasonable as well.
Brian, as ek terugkyk, 30 jaar gelede vou julle besigheid. 20 jaar gelede open julle die eerste Fruit and Veg besigheid. Vandag bestaan Fruit and Veg en Food Lovers Market uit 118 winkels. Dan het julle nog 129 fresh stop winkels ook. As jy kyk na hierdie sukses, wat is die kernbeginsels wat jy hierdie sukses opgebou het?
Okay, besides the fact that we're very blessed, we're also the same people that started with us are still with us almost. So we have a very approachable, focused management style where everybody is almost on the same level. And we certainly learned in those days that we had to measure everything. So the more we measure, the more we know. It's an urgent business. You certainly need energetic people around you to do it. And most of all, we have fun while we're doing it. I think that's a big principle in our business. We make sure that if we're not having fun, then what are we doing here?
As jy moet advies gee aan iemand wat 'n loopbaan wil bou in die kleinhandelbesigheid, wat is die advies in terme van beginsels, fokusareas, waarop moet 'n ou fokus?
Theo, eers moet jy vind, waar is jou liefde en waar is jou passie? En as jy liefde en passie vir dit het, sal jy goed wees met dit. Now, I don't know what comes first, if you love what you do because you're good at it, or if you're good at it because you love what you do. But you have to love what you do. Maar dan vat jy die passie en die liefde, en jy sit die harde werk in, en dan kry jy die sukses.